The cake was 3 layers tall, covered in pale yellow frosting, with tiny sugar roses pressed carefully around the base. My mother had requested lemon. She always requested lemon, and my sister Rachel had driven 40 minutes to the only bakery in the county that made it the way Mom liked, with a thin ribbon of raspberry jam hidden between the second and third tier, like a sweet, private secret. I remember that cake so clearly because I was standing near it, watching the candles being arranged, when I heard the sound that would split my life into before and after. It wasn't loud. That's the part that haunted me in the weeks that followed, when I replayed those 3 seconds, over and over, in the dark hours after midnight while Caleb slept down the hall. A slap, you imagine, would be sharp, a crack that silences every conversation at once, a sound that demands the room's attention. But this one was soft, a flat, dull, horrible little sound, the kind that lands in your chest before your mind has finished understanding what it was. And then my son started crying. Caleb was 8 years old. He had worn his good shirt that day, the navy blue one with the small collar that he had picked out himself at the store 3 weeks earlier, because it made him feel, in his own serious words, like a professional man. He'd stood in front of the hallway mirror that morning, adjusting it with a concentration so intense and so tender that I'd had to look away to keep from laughing with pure love. He was so proud of that shirt. He'd been carrying a cup of fruit punch across the living room, moving carefully the way I'd taught him, eyes on the cup, slow steps, both hands. But the room was crowded with cousins and aunts and the loud, layered noise of a family that hadn't all been together in almost a year. Someone bumped him, Cousin Tyler, 11 years old and incapable of walking anywhere, and the punch tipped sideways and came down in a dark red wave across the sleeve and lapel of my brother, Derek's white dress shirt. Derek had chosen to wear a white dress shirt to an outdoor birthday party with children present. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. Derek's face shifted, not into shock, not even into irritation, but into something colder and more deliberate. He looked down at the stain spreading across his chest, then looked at Caleb standing there, frozen, with the empty cup still in both hands, his little face already crumpling with the particular horror children feel when they know they've done something wrong, even when it wasn't their fault. And Derek raised his hand and brought it down across the side of my son's face. The room didn't go silent all at once. It went silent in a wave, the way a crowd reacts when something registers slowly. First the people closest, then the ones who turned to see what the nearest faces were reacting to, until within about 4 seconds there was no sound in my mother's living room except Caleb, crying and the muffled birthday music still playing from the small Bluetooth speaker on the lav. Kitchen counter, cheerful and completely wrong. I crossed the room. I don't remember deciding to. My body moved before my mind issued any instruction, the way it does in the first seconds of a car accident or a fall. I was beside Caleb, with my hand on his shoulder and my eyes on Derek before I had formed a single, coherent thought, and what came out of my mouth was quiet and very controlled, which surprised even me. "You just hit my son." Derek straightened his cuffs. He actually straightened his cuffs, tugging each one down with 2 fingers, the way men do when were performing composure for an audience. Then he looked at me with an expression I had seen on his face since we were children, that particular blend of dismissal and impatience that he wore whenever anyone around him had feelings he found inconvenient. "He ruined my shirt," Derek said. "A little tap never hurt anyone. You're being too sensitive." Those 4 words, "You're being too sensitive." They landed with a quietness that was worse than shouting. And around us, the family stood in a loose, uncertain ring, and not one of them, not one, said a single word in our defense. I held Caleb against my side and felt him shaking, and I looked at my brother's face, and something in me made a very quiet, very permanent decision. The drive home that evening was the quietest 40 minutes of my life. Caleb sat in the back seat with his seatbelt on and his hands folded in his lap, which was not how he normally sat. Normally he had a book, or he was asking questions about road signs, or he was humming something, tuneless and continuous, that used to mildly drive me crazy, and that I would have given anything to hear right then. Instead, he just sat there, watching the darkening road through the window, and once, about 20 minutes in, he asked me a question in a very small voice. "Mom, did I do something bad?" I pulled into a gas station I didn't need and sat in the parking lot for a few minutes with the engine running and held his hand over the back of the seat and told him the truth, that he had done nothing wrong, that accidents happen, that what Uncle Derek did was not acceptable, and that I was proud of how he had carried himself. He nodded slowly, in the way children do when they are trying to believe something that still hurts. Then he asked if we could have grilled cheese when we got home, and I said yes, and I kept my voice completely steady until he went to bed. The calls started the next morning. First my sister Rachel, then my Aunt Pauline, then my mother herself, each one arriving with a slightly different flavor of the same message. Derek hadn't meant it the way it looked. Derek was stressed about work. Derek had a temper, yes, but he loved Caleb. Of course he did. And the word that came up again and again, passed between them like a baton in a relay race nobody had asked me to join, was overreaction. I had overreacted. The situation had been overreacted to. If I could just see past my overreaction, we could all move forward. My mother's call was the hardest. She didn't defend Derek outright. She was too careful for that. Too practiced in the art of keeping a family intact by never fully taking a side. What she did instead was softer, and in some ways worse. She told me she loved me. She told me she loved Caleb. And then she told me that Derek was her son too, and that she hoped I could find it in my heart to let this go before it became something bigger than it needed to be. I asked her, very gently, what she would have wanted me to do if someone had hit her grandchild in front of her. There was a long pause on the line. "That's not fair," she said finally. "No," I agreed. "It isn't." Derek himself never called. Not that day, not the next, not in the 3 weeks that followed. No text, no voicemail, no second-hand message passed through Rachel or my mother asking if Caleb was okay. Nothing. The silence from him was so complete and so comfortable that it told me everything I needed to know about how sorry he actually was. A man who strikes a child and then waits in perfect quiet for the world to normalize around him is not a man who is wrestling with his conscience. He was simply waiting for the family to do what it had always done. Smooth it over, absorb it, file it somewhere unnamed so that Sunday dinners could continue undisturbed. And the family was trying. I could feel them trying. The group chat filled up with unrelated cheerful messages. A photo of Rachel's garden, a meme my aunt liked, a question about Thanksgiving plans, each one a small, deliberate stone laid over the gap, building a path that everyone hoped I would simply walk across without looking down. I didn't respond to any of them. At night, after Caleb was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold, and I thought about what it meant to let something go. I had let things go before. I had let Derek's sharpness go, his condescension, the jokes at my expense that were never quite jokes. I had let them go for my mother's sake, for the sake of family, for the shapeless reason people give when they mean they are tired of conflict. But Caleb had watched me absorb every one of those moments and draw no boundary, and now Caleb's own face had been the thing that was struck, and somewhere in that quiet kitchen, I understood that what I let go of now was not just a family incident. It was a lesson I was teaching my son about what he was worth. I picked up my cold tea and poured it down the sink and went to bed, but I did not let it go. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, slipped through my door in a cream-colored envelope with Derek's wife Sandra, his handwriting on the front. Neat, looping letters, the kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who still owns a good pen. Inside was a card, printed professionally, announcing a celebration dinner for Derek's promotion to regional director at his firm. Saturday the 14th, Fontaine's restaurant downtown. Cocktails at 7, dinner at 8. The whole family was expected. There was even a small handwritten note at the bottom in Sandra's same careful script. It wouldn't be the same without you and Caleb there. I set the card on the kitchen counter and looked at it for a long time. Here is what I knew about Derek and this promotion. He had wanted it for 4 years. He had talked about it at every family gathering for so long that it had become a kind of background noise, like the hum of a refrigerator, always present, rarely noticed. He had restructured his entire identity around the possibility of it, and now that it had arrived, he wanted his family assembled around him like a tableau, proof that he was the kind of man whose people show up. Derek needed an audience the way some people need oxygen. A celebration with empty chairs would register to him not as an absence, but as a verdict. I put the invitation in the kitchen drawer and said nothing to anyone. Over the following 2 weeks, I moved quietly. I called Rachel not to discuss the dinner, but to ask if she had noticed, over the years, a pattern in Derek's behavior. The sharpness, the physical intimidation that always stopped just short of something undeniable. Rachel was quiet for a moment, and then said, carefully, that she had noticed some things. I asked my Aunt Pauline a similar question in a different way. I was not building a legal case. I was building a map, a shared understanding among the people who loved me that what had happened at Mom's birthday was not an isolated incident, but the most visible point of something much longer and much older. I also spoke to Caleb's school counselor, not because Caleb was struggling visibly, but because I wanted someone outside the family to know what had happened and to check on him with professional eyes. She was kind and thorough, and at the end of our conversation she said something that stayed with me. Children don't remember every word adults say to them, she told me, but they remember exactly how adults made them feel about themselves. Caleb is going to remember this. What he remembers depends on what you do next. I drove home from that meeting with my hands steady on the wheel and something resolving in my ear. Chest like a knot being untied slowly, one loop at a time. I did not tell my mother what I was planning. I loved her too much to deceive her and too much to burden her with a choice before it was mine. Necessary. What I did instead was visit her on a Wednesday afternoon, just the two of us, and I brought her tulips because they were her favorite, and I sat with her in her kitchen, and we talked about everything except Derek for 2 full hours. When I hugged her goodbye at the door, she held on a moment longer than usual, and I let her, and I memorized the smell of her cardigan, because I knew the next few weeks were going to strain. Something between us that I hoped was strong enough to survive. At home, I sat down and wrote 2 things. The first was a letter, measured, clear, without cruelty, stating plainly what Derek had done, what the family's silence had communicated, and what my response to both was going to be. The second was a note to Sandra, separate and private, because Sandra had not raised her hand to offend anyone and deserved to be treated differently than her husband. I sealed both envelopes and set them on the counter next to the original invitation, which I had retrieved from the kitchen drawer. Then I looked at the date on the invitation, Saturday the 14th, and I looked at my calendar, and I made a reservation. Not at Fontaine's. At a small Italian restaurant across town that Caleb loved, the one with the checkered tablecloths and the breadbasket that arrived immediately, and the owner who always remembered his name. I booked a table for 2 for 7 o'clock on Saturday the 14th. Same time, different room, a better one. Then I picked up the phone and called Rachel, and this time I told her everything. And when I finished, there was a silence on the line, and then she said, quietly and with complete steadiness, "Tell me what you need me to do." Saturday the 14th arrived cold and clear, the kind of autumn evening where the air has a clean bite to it, and everything looks slightly more defined than usual, like the world has been sharpened overnight. I dressed Caleb in his navy blue shirt, the good one, the professional man shirt, and he wore it without being asked, pulling it on with the same careful concentration he always gave it, smoothing the collar down with both hands in front of the hallway mirror. I stood behind him and watched his reflection and felt something so large and so quiet move through me that I had to look at the ceiling for a moment. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Somewhere that deserves us," I told him. We arrived at Romano's at 5 minutes to 7. Marco, the owner, met us at the door with the particular warmth he reserved for regulars he genuinely liked, and he led us to the corner table near the window, the one with the small candle in a glass holder. and the view of the street outside where people walked past in their coats with their breath visible in the cold air. The bread basket arrived within 2 minutes. Caleb tore into it with both hands and told me very seriously that Romano's bread was scientifically the best bread in the world, and I agreed that the evidence strongly supported this conclusion. Across town, at Fontaine's restaurant, the family was gathering around a long reserved table. Derek was there in a new shirt, not white this time, receiving handshakes from uncles and nods from cousins and the particular deference that families extend to the member who is currently being celebrated. Sandra was there, gracious and organized, directing the seating with quiet efficiency. My mother was there, dressed beautifully, smiling the way she smiled at family events, fully and a little carefully, the way you smile when you are hoping very hard that everything stays pleasant. 2 seats were empty. Rachel had told me later, in precise and almost clinical detail, exactly how it unfolded. Derek had noticed the empty chairs early, around 7:15, and had asked Sandra if she'd heard from me. Sandra had said nothing, only reached into her small evening bag and produced the envelope I had sent her, and set it on the table in front of him without comment. Derek had looked at it for a moment, and then opened it, and Rachel said the table went very quiet while he read, the kind of quiet where everyone is pretending to study their menus. The letter was not long. I had worked on it for 4 evenings, cutting it down each time, removing every sentence that was motivated by anger rather than clarity, until what remained was clean and irrefutable. It said that I loved my family and always would. It said that what happened at my mother's birthday party was not a small thing, regardless of how the family had chosen to frame it. It said that a man who strikes a child and then waits in comfortable silence for the world to normalize around him had told me everything I needed to know about his remorse. It said that I was not too sensitive. It said that I was a mother. And it said that Caleb and I would not be present at celebrations for people who had not acknowledged that his face and his dignity mattered, and that this was not a punishment but a boundary, and that the door would remain open the moment a real apology arrived, not a managed one, not a family-mediated one, but a direct and private one, offered to Caleb first and to me second. It ended with one sentence that I had written last and almost cut and then decided to keep. I hope one day you understand that protecting him was the easiest thing I have ever done. Rachel said Derek folded the letter and put it in his jacket pocket and did not speak for several minutes. She said my mother asked quietly if she could see it, and Derek handed it to her without a word, and my mother read it at the table with her glasses on and her hands very still, and when she finished, she folded it along its original creases and held it in her lap and looked at nothing in particular for a long time. At Romano's, Caleb was telling me about a book he was reading, something about a boy who discovers a door in the back of his school that leads to a world made entirely of weather. He was animated and specific, using his hands, interrupting himself to backtrack and add details he'd forgotten. The candle threw a warm circle of light across the checkered tablecloth, and the bread basket was almost empty, and outside the window, the cold street moved quietly past, and I sat across from my Mar and listened to every single word. The pasta arrived. It was perfect. Caleb said so with the authority of someone issuing a formal verdict, and then immediately asked if he could have dessert, and I said yes before he finished the question. Some evenings you carry for the rest of your life, not because they were dramatic or loud, but because they were exactly right, because in them you were exactly who you needed to be, in exactly the right place, with exactly the right person. This was one of those evenings. The empty chairs at Fontaine's were not revenge in the way people imagine revenge, loud and satisfying and final. They were something quieter and more lasting. They were a record, a mark in the world that said, this child was worth showing up for, and I showed up. Derek called 3 weeks later. The conversation was short and imperfect and human, the way real apologies always are, halting in places, slightly defensive in others, but present in a way his silence had never been. He asked to speak to Caleb. I said I would think about it, and I meant it, and eventually, carefully, I did. But that came later. That Saturday, in Romano's, with the candle burning low, and Caleb's face lit up over a bowl of tiramisu he was eating with architectural precision. I was not thinking about Derek at all. I was just a mother, having dinner with her son, and we were doing beautifully.